Well, that's the completion of the review of the basic swing and the impact. But of course, there's a lot more to it than that. So I want to talk about a couple of elements and how to take your good swings and good shots out on the golf course a little bit easier. And that's to talk about two things. That's stance and aim. If you didn't know better, you might think those are the same thing, but they're a little bit different, and I want to talk about how. Stance is basically how your knees and feet and hips and shoulders relate to one another. So having a good stance is important in this game. Basically, I'm setting up in a way that's going to allow me to hit that golf ball down on the ground. If the ball were up in the air, I would stand tall and swing this way. That same tall stance, however, would not suit a ball very well down onto the ground, because now as I turn, the club would want to go up here. I would have to manipulate it with my arms. That's why when you stand, you want to have a little bit of a bend from the waist. That sets you up to hit that golf ball down onto the ground like that. My knees, hips, shoulders, and feet are basically parallel to that target line. The target line is the one from the ball to the target. So my feet, knees, hips, and shoulders line up along that line. Now, of course, there are different stances also, however. That's when your stance gets a little bit different with your shoulders or your knees. It might even be your hips or your feet. You can imagine a stance that has my knees flexed a lot. This is a different stance here. That's a different stance there. And changing those elements around, that's different stances. Now, the way you practice your stance is at home, believe it or not. You can use a mirror. The sliding glass door at night is one that I've used for a long time. Don't swing back and hit the window. But checking your stance is a great thing to do. For the very proficient players, I tell them that they should check their stance even once a day. Just pull up in front of the mirror and double check how everything is relating to one another. If you have your shoulder way out and you've got those shoulders pointed in a different direction than where you want to go, then you have to manipulate your swing to get the ball to go straight. So having the stance correct is very important. Just go ahead and set up. You might not be very far from that sliding glass door. Take your stance first, then look. Now, setting up first like this, it doesn't let you cheat, because it's easy to stand there and be watching as you're making your setup to get it just so. But what I like to do is I like to go ahead and put a ball down, set up to that ball like I'm ready to hit it, then look. You can check from the front and from the side. Those are the two elements you're going to check to see if the stance is correct. So that's very important to get the stance in the right shape, if you will. Now, the second element that's really important is the aim. That's taking that whole package and pointing it in the right direction. As I said just a minute ago, if you aim incorrectly, you might make a great swing and the ball goes crooked. And you might say to yourself, oh, bad shot, bad swing. Well, you might have made a great swing, but you just didn't aim correctly. So I want to talk a little bit about that. Aim is where that whole package points. So you can imagine a stance that's heading down the golf course might look like this. Here's an identical stance, simply in a different direction. I can also do the same thing to the left. That's an identical stance in a different direction. Here's a different stance, but here's a different aim. So having us stand in the right place is going to help us to shoot the ball in the right direction. And here's how you do it. There's a great way to do this, and that is to use the golf club and a little bit of a look down the target line. Now, what I mean by that is that somewhere in your pre-shot routine, as you're getting ready to hit, you want to walk around behind the ball and look down the target line. So you're going to set up and go ahead and take a look right down the target line and try to pick out a spot that's in front of the ball. Not very far away either. You're looking to pick a spot that might only be a foot or two in front of the ball. Now, once we do that, it's very easy to line the club up in the right direction, to point that club right at that spot. If my spot is well down the range, it's a little bit tougher to get that club lined up exactly to that spot. Looking down the target line is something you'll see from the game's best players. Certainly during their pre-shot routine, at some point they will get behind it. It might be before they make their practice swings, it might be after, but usually somewhere in there they will look down the target line and get a spot. Not every single great player has done that. Ben Hogan used to eyeball it from the side, but that's very rare to be able to do that and aim correctly. So walking around behind it, picking out that spot so that you can aim your club correctly. Now, what I mean by that is you're going to walk back forward and your eyes are on this spot as you walk up. So that's something that's going to be very important. A lot of people pick out their target line, and then they walk up and they take another look at their target and they lose their spot. So you want to keep your eyes on that spot as you walk up. Once I do that, my eyes are on this spot, they're still on that spot, still on that spot. Set the club face looking right at that spot and making sure that the handle is not too far forward or too far back. Now this is really important because the club is going to give you the reference for where to stand. Now I've practiced this through my work in front of the mirror, if you will, so I've learned not to set up with the club too far forward or too far back. Setting up the club face at my point there on the ground, making sure the club handle is not too far forward or too far back. And now I go ahead and make my stance just like I've practiced in the mirror there. So with this club down as a reference, it's unlikely that I'm going to stay over here because I can feel that like crazy. I can also feel if I'm over here. So the club basically makes me stand in the right place. I can't tell you how important this is. So as you walk up and set your club down, as you're setting your body and your feet, I want you to keep your eyes on the club so that it doesn't get switched around as you're making your setup. So in other words, some people will go ahead and do this, and then they'll start to do that as they're looking down the range, and then they set up what feels comfortable to them, but all of a sudden their aim is out of whack. So setting the club down first, then yourself, that's the key to good aiming. Eyeballing it from the side is very difficult because sometimes a hole goes this way and the fairway goes that way and the green's over there behind the tree, and it optically becomes a nightmare. Using this method, though, is really helpful because that way for those optical illusions out on the golf course, you're basically immune from them because you can stand behind, pick out that line, and pick out that spot that you need, and it's really helpful. You know, I was playing with a friend of mine in a tournament, and he doesn't use this method. He likes to eyeball it from the side and just try to get a feel for it that way. Well, the course we were playing in this tournament had tee boxes that went every which way, so it was never quite matching the fairway. So he had a really tough time in lining himself up. Lots of backing off all day long. He was having a tough time. I actually saw him shank an iron off the tee, and this is, again, a tour caliber player. So he really had a tough time just because of those optics. I could see that the tee box was pointing sideways, but it really didn't bother me that much because I was able to pick out my spot. So this method is really a good one. So stance versus aim. Make sure you practice it, setting up to the club first, and then your feet, then your shoulders, and you'll have it made. Practice the stance in the mirror so you can set up to the club correctly, and again, once you get that club down, you're ready to go.